The future is in your hands. It is a known story. Once upon a time, there were two very smart sisters who lived in a town. Their hunger for knowledge was so great that they wanted to learn new things every day, but they were never satisfied with what they learned. Over time, the information they received from their schools and their surroundings began to seem very inadequate. For them, there was no one left in town to answer their questions and provide the information they wanted. The two siblings decided to leave this town, which was exhausted for them, and go to the big city. When, after some time, the answers to the questions of the girls who started to live in the city did not satisfy them again, they decided to go to the most famous sage of the country. The sage asked every question the sisters asked. However, after a while, the sisters got bored with this and decided to ask a question that even he could not know and started to think. Sometime later, one of the sisters delightedly exclaimed, "I found a question that the sage cannot know." She began explaining to her sister, who asked, "What are you going to ask?" "I will take a butterfly in my hands. I will ask the sage whether the butterfly is alive or dead. If he says dead, I will release the butterfly. If he says alive, I'm going to press my hands lightly." They ran to the sage. Holding the butterfly tightly in her hands, the girl extended her arm towards the sage and asked, "I have a butterfly in my hand. Guess if it's alive or dead." The sage looked into her eyes for a long time and replied, "If it is in your hands, girl, in your hands." The moral of the story is clear. When you hold a butterfly in your hand, you can decide whether it will live or die, just as you can make decisions about the lives that are already in your hands. When Ghazi Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was asked how he was successful, the answer he gave was very meaningful. "When I start a business, I first calculate the obstacles that may come my way. Then the first thing I do is to remove those obstacles. Success comes by itself." This is the secret of life of Henry Ford, who said, "Obstacles are those frightful things you see when you take your eyes off your goals." Having quoted Ford's words, I also find it useful to mention him. As you know, Henry Ford is an American automobile manufacturer and one of the richest people in the world, whose reputation is very well known by everyone. He was born into an ordinary family on a small farm in Dearborn, Michigan. He went to school as an ordinary boy, and when he came back from school, he spent almost all his evenings and all summer holidays doing farm work. As a child, he faced perhaps the greatest fear a child could ever face. He had lost his beloved mother. He also left school. Now he started to be curious about machines in order to escape from the terrible reality in his head, and on the other hand, perhaps with the mind of a child, to draw a new path for himself. He was trying to understand the working principles of old and useless mechanics by tearing down whatever he saw. Moreover, sometimes just making it work was not enough. The concern of how to make it work better and more efficiently was taking up all of his time. When Henry Ford was a 17-year-old boy, he also had trouble making a living. So when he entered a machine-building house as an apprentice, he was undoubtedly working with pleasure. But the money he earned from the apprenticeship was not enough. As a side job, he worked for a jeweler every evening when he got off work. He had a talent beyond his interest in machines. He began to gain what he lacked, namely experience alongside his master. When he decided to combine his interest in farming and machinery, which he had been doing since childhood, he had the idea that farming, of which he knew the difficulties, could be facilitated by machines. He had set a goal for his studies. The small workshop where he was working now was becoming too small for him, and he decided to take bigger steps towards his goals. He was considering going to Detroit, where the industry was developed. When he got a job opportunity in the company called Edison in that city, his life started to change slowly in the direction of his goals. It did not take long for his talent to be discovered in Edison, which he entered as a machinist and quickly rose to become a chief engineer. His interest was slowly shifting from agricultural vehicles to engine production. He was thinking day and night, and he wanted to prove his maturity by making a different production. His purpose was to build a machine to tow light-bodied cars. The birth of ideas, like any new birth, undoubtedly requires a very difficult process, where patience and persistence were very important. Henry Ford finally succeeded in making a light engine that ran on gasoline. Thus, he made a great contribution to the development of the automobile industry, which had just begun. In 1892, Ford finished the prototype of the car he was working on, powered by a 2-cylinder, 4-horsepower engine. As he continued to work on this first example, he was trying to convince that it could work. As Albert Einstein said, prejudice are harder to break than to split the atom. That is why, for Ford, even the effort to explain what he had just done was difficult to do. After much struggle, he had convinced everyone that his car could work. The prototype was flawless. Everything was ready for its likeness now. When he set to work on making the second car, exactly 7 years had passed since the first production, and he was now the chief engineer of the Detroit Auto Company, starting to build cars for that company. Those were the years when motor vehicles were just beginning to be used, and high costs that could be considered luxury were pronounced. The company Ford worked for preferred to manufacture by considering these parameters, and built its manufacturing policy on this logic. Ford's production policy was very different. He was advocating the idea of making a large number of manufacturers, making cars cheap and selling them cheap, thus gaining from the sale. He prepared all his studies and ratios accordingly and presented them to the management. However, the company, which did not comprise on its traditional management approach, did not take kindly to this idea. From that tiny farm, Ford had come to the industrial world chasing his dreams and defending what he thought was right to the end. Whatever the circumstances, he did not intend to compromise his opinion, to surrender without defending what he thought was right. However, despite all their insistence, the management was building a wall against mass production. He eventually had to leave the company. At a definite crossroads, Ford was left with only one option, and the date was 1902. Now today, the story of the Ford Motor Company, known to the whole world, would begin. When he started the business with $100,000 as the capital of the company, he was doing everything he dreamed of with bold steps, producing cars in different models, even if it was considered a risk at that time. Ford's creations were well received in every environment, while his rivals thought he would sink soon. In the year the company was founded, 1,708 two-cylinder 8-horsepower cars were produced. By 1926, the company's capital had risen to $1 billion. The Ford Corporation had become the world's largest motor company. Not only automobiles, but also vehicles of different types and uses, and their spare parts were passing through the production line. Ford had put a cheap price on his goods, but he was making a profit from the many manufacturers and releases. Besides machines, he was also investing in people. He was appreciated with the foundations and charities he founded. He did not leave his workers and production until the age of 82. He was 84 years old when he died. Be as positive as you can in your business and social life throughout your life. The more you give your positive energy first to yourself, your family, your living space, your kinship relations, and your country, you and everyone around you will be successful and happy. Hasan YILDIZ, TEDx Hacettepe University Speech, 18th of June 2022. Nations that show respect for people, for women, for children, for innocent people, and for animals are powerful nations in the world. I am wishing a livable world where violence ends and love, brotherhood, fraternity are permanent. Hasan YILDIZ, TEDx Hacettepe University Speech, 18th of June 2022. Manage yourself, and you can find the strength to manage the world. Platon. Do not be afraid. As long as you do your work well, you will be successful. You will certainly win. Hasan YILDIZ, TEDx Hacettepe University Speech, 18th of June 2022. The two most powerful warriors are patience and time. Leo Tolstoy.